One of the terms that is perhaps the easiest to identify but the most difficult to define in psychology would be personality. We all know what is meant by saying he or she has a good personality, but to say that and that alone lacks the science. Without science, a statement like that is pure pseudoscience. It's half-baked, it's not quite there yet. But getting to what personality is, clearly defining it, is easier said than done. There are two approaches that we're going to look at, one from the psychodynamic and the other from the trait perspective, that offer a variety of tests connected with measuring and assessing one's personality. Now, for a test to be good and scientific, any type of personality test to be good and scientific, it must test or must contain two measures. It must be reliable or consistent, and it must be valid or accurate. Now, each one of the perspectives that we're going to look at, both have their strengths and both have their weaknesses. Testing the unconscious. Now, there are a couple ways of doing this, and if you notice the terms as they show up in red, through hypnosis, through projective tests, and we'll look at a few of those examples here in just a moment. Those projective tests could be a TAT test, a thematic apperception test, or a Rorschach type of ink blots test. Dream interpretation, Sigmund Freud himself put great emphasis on dreams, referring to them as the royal road to the unconscious. And then basic free association, the image that's on the right, the piñata talking to his therapist, would be an example of free association. What one would do is just talk. And as they are just talking, whatever comes to their mind, ideally uncensored, the therapist is then going to listen for common themes that happen to show up. Terms, concepts, people, places that keep showing up over and over and over again. And more than likely, the person that's saying it, perhaps they don't realize that they keep saying or harping on that theme, and it might require a little bit of additional digging. Now, the major catch with assessing and probing the unconscious, again, is that you're drawing from things that may or may not have happened to you in the past. An example of this would be a TAT test. What you would do, you would be given a picture or an open, very, very ambiguous picture. And what you would have to do by yourself, you would have to come up with some sort of story. And whatever you say is the manifest content, for that is the plot, the narrative of whatever it is that you're writing about. And then whatever kinds of themes the person that's reading it and analyzing it picks up on is then the latent aspect of it. So for example, a TAT projective test example. You may be given a picture like this and given about 10 or 15 minutes to write a story about this little boy. Maybe some of the things that you write about are that he's impoverished. Maybe you say that this photo is taken during the Great Depression. Maybe you happen to cite that his parents have abandoned him, or his parents perhaps are dead. Maybe this is the sort of stuff that makes up your narrative. If that is what you've written, or if that's what you're thinking looking at this, that then is the manifest content. The latent aspect of it would be where you take that content and then you analyze it. So if you said that this photo takes place during the Great Depression, maybe that would warrant some additional analysis. Are you feeling depressed? If you cited something about his parents being gone, they've abandoned him, well, then maybe what you are doing in a projective manner, you're suggesting that there is some ill feelings of abandonment that you have towards your parents. Another example of this, you're given this picture, and then you are given about 10 or 15 minutes to write what's going on in the story. If you write that this woman has just murdered the man that's in the bed, because maybe he's cheating. Perhaps unconsciously you feel insecure about some of the relationships that you're in. Maybe this picture right here, the young woman with the older woman in the background. If you say in your narrative that this woman in the background is her mother, perhaps maybe you are harboring ill feelings about your own parent, mother, or caregiver at home. If perhaps this is herself in the future, the young woman is her in the present, the old woman in the background is her in the future, maybe you are unconsciously projecting feelings of anxiety that you have about the future events onto the image. This picture, similarly, you'd be given this picture, again, a TAT test, given about 15 minutes to write, and then whatever shows up would then warrant further analysis. Again, another example of a thematic apperception projective test. You would be given this picture and then given about 10 or 15 minutes to write a story, and then it would be analyzed for certain themes. The Rorschach tests are very similar, where you are given very random splotchy images, and ideally the very first thing that you see, that's what you write down, that's what you identify. With the images that are showing up on the screen, and this would be a good example. For myself, the very first thing that I see here would be two seahorses up at the top. But perhaps the very first thing that you see when you look at this is the skull here at the bottom. Okay, well, if the image of death shows up quite often with the images that you're looking at, that might symbolize some sort of unconscious feelings of internal anxiety, self-destructive tendencies that one might have and be harboring. Again, yet another Rorschach image, and ideally how this should be taken, the very, very first thing that comes to mind when you see it. And then more Rorschach images. And then the last one, the very first thing that I see with this, almost looks like two pigs on either side. But maybe you see a scary mask, a death mask. Maybe some of the images, there are overtly sexual things that you happen to see that may unconsciously reveal something about internal strife that you may be dealing with on the inside. Now, I mentioned that each one of these have their strengths and each one of these have their weaknesses. Well, if you've noticed, at least with the ink blots and the TAT test, the projective test, I think the weaknesses are pretty apparent. Who would I be or the therapist be to suggest that any of these stand for anything other than what they are? Okay, maybe you didn't do so well with the ink blots test. Maybe you didn't see anything in the images, as they are kind of an example of maybe a test of creativity as opposed to a test of one's personality. Okay, so certainly that's a limitation. Where is the validity behind any of this? Additionally, though, a benefit of tests of this nature. The ones we're going to look at here in just a moment, the trait-based ones that tend to be much more multiple choice or true-false in nature, it is very, very easy for you to lie. These here, if you don't know that it's a test of your personality, if your guard is down, you in your narrative may inadvertently reveal something about what may be going on the inside. Now, the types of personality tests that most people are familiar with are the ones that are more trait-based. Trait psychology suggests that your personality is hardwired into you from birth. That certain temperaments that you are born with are unwavering throughout your entire lifespan. So the worried baby here in the picture would be the worried adult, a worrier all his life. The happy baby, the jovial baby, even in his latter years, a much more jovial disposition would be displayed. that attribute, that characteristic, was hardwired, knit into the fabric of his DNA. These 5 categories, the mnemonic ocean, spells out these temperaments. And most trait-based tests that you've probably taken online use some sort of variety of these 5. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Most trait-based tests are very, very lengthy in nature. It's very unlikely, if you've ever taken a legitimate trait-based test, that you've taken a short one. Usually the tests are going to range anywhere from 30 to maybe 80 questions. Some of them may seem to overlap a little bit. For example, if you look at the 5 categories that are here, and some tests that you take expand upon this, some tests that you take maybe fewer than the 5 that are here might be present and represented. But say you run across a question that suggests or maybe asks you in a true or false scenario, in a large group of people, I feel comfortable. Which one of the 5 might that pair up with? Okay, well, a statement like that may be connected with extroversion, but could also be connected with agreeableness as well as openness. Maybe there's a question, multiple choice in nature or true false, and it's asking you a question about how you react when you're upset. Maybe you throw things, maybe you take a nap, or you try to talk with the person about why you're upset and what's upsetting you. Okay, well, a question or a statement like that would fall into the neuroticism category, but could also have overtures to these other categories as well. Again, these are inventories. Think of them as personality categories. So some examples of some of the tests that go along with this. The first of these would be 16 personality factors. This would be Raymond Cattell's personality test, and I'll have an example of that here in a second. Another one of these would be the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. If you have ever been diagnosed with a major mental condition, especially one that warrants some degree of medication, you have probably taken one of these. And one that most students might be more familiar with would be the Myers-Briggs MB Type Inventory. This one has I/O applications, workplace applications. If you have ever taken a personality test for roommate selection in college, if you have ever had to take a personality test to get a job, more than likely it is of a Myers-Briggs sort. Most of the trait-based personality tests are usually multiple choice, either or, true, false in nature. This one's meant to be silly. Okay, are you one that's going to use the lint roller, or do you just shave the cat? Do you dirty the cup, or do you drink straight from the jug? An example of a Cattell 16 personality factors test. If you notice the factors that are listed here, what you would do with these different varying categories, you would go through and circle which one applies to you. Now, each one of these have their strengths, each one of these have their weakness. Okay, and if you notice, this is kind of an either or. So do you identify yourself as reserved, or do you identify yourself as outgoing? Well, there's no option for a write-in. There is no room for me to put an extra answer in. Okay, I'm kind of limited in my answer selections, which is a problem. Also, I can easily lie as I go through this. That's another problem. This is an example of a sample Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory test. Now remember, this one is used to diagnose different disorders. And this is only a small segment of some of the questions that are there. This is also a very good example of a trait-based one, as there are a lot of questions that are on there, This would be a true-false type of scenario. Certainly a benefit, an advantage of a test like this is that it would be very easy to grade. This could easily be done on a Scantron. This could easily be done on a laptop. Okay, but then also the person could very easily lie, which is a key limitation with many of the trait-based tests.